Well, you're in for a treat today. We're going to be talking with David Harvey on the lectures that he's given now for almost 40 years, I think, on Kapital'i. My name's Neil Smith. I teach in anthropology and geography at the City University of New York. And David's been a colleague of mine since he came here. But before that, a long time before that, more than 30 years, I was a student of David's at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And that's where I first became not aware of Kapital'i as a book, but that's where I first read through it and did so indeed with David. David, what inspired you to start to want to read Kapital'i back, presumably in the very early 1970s?
It was one of those historical moments where it seemed right to do it. I arrived from England, fresh off the boat in the summer of '69. I arrived into a city, Baltimore, where in 1968 there had been tremendous eruption of violence in the city in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King. The civil rights questions in the city were blatant. The racism in the city was blatant. The Vietnam War was on, and all the war protests were hotting up. And it was a very, very confused time. And I remember in, I think, December of '69, Fred Hampton got assassinated in Chicago, Black Panther leader. And shortly after that, in May '70, there were the killings at Kent State. Huge student strike, millions of students all over the country just went on strike. And then after that, there were killings at Jackson State. So this was a very, very, very upset time. And I think, for me anyway, there was also a sense that we didn't quite know how to handle, or how to explain this. And I've been sort of trained or as a sort of social scientist thinking about things, and I couldn't find a framework that would really encompass all that was going on. So I said to a few graduate students, hey, why don't we just read Kapital'i? Since it's a book we haven't read, maybe there's something in there that would work. And so a few of us sat down and we ran on a reading group on it, and that's how it all began. And then, having done it once and completely misunderstood the book, completely misunderstood it. Now I look back and I'd be embarrassed to listen to what we were saying about this book in the first, it was the blind leading the blind through this enormous text, and we didn't know what we were doing. And then we thought, well, we've done it once, we better do it again, because we obviously haven't got this quite right. But one thing I did learn at that point from that was you only really begin to understand Kapital'i when you get to the end. It's very hard to start off with it, sort of clear kind of understanding. So the second year we decided we'd have another go at it, and we had another go at it. And then I thought to myself, well, this is interesting now. I began to see a framework emerging that could help me explain what was going on. So I thought, well, I should keep at it. And there were people around like me who kind of felt they needed a framework. And so step by step, I started to say, well, I'll do this every year. And of course, one of the things that happens when you do that is that you suddenly find yourself called a Marxist. I had no idea what a Marxist was, and I really didn't, care too much initially, but suddenly, just because you're reading the book and taking it seriously, and you want to know more about how to understand the world through these lenses, you suddenly find yourself in this political corner, and after a bit you say, oh, well, I guess if that's who I am, then that's who I am, so. Right.
Well, I think it might be useful if, since the lectures are coming, if you gave us a bit of an overview, a bit of a discussion of what you think are the high points of the chapters in Volume 1 of Kapital'i.
One of the things that I think is really good to do, and one of the reasons I've got a great deal of pleasure out of teaching this course this way, is that many people have taken courses where they've done a little bit of Marx, a little bit of Weber, Durkheim, this kind of stuff. They've read excerpts from Marx or something like that, but they've never actually read it as a book. And it is a fantastic literary construction. So one of the things that I really want to highlight is what a good read it is. Once you get past the difficulties of the language and grappling with all these kind of concepts and so on, it's a really, really dynamic piece. It flows very well. And it flows from the beginning point, which is just about a simple idea of a commodity. You go into a supermarket, you find a commodity, you buy the commodity, you take it home, you eat it or wear it or whatever. And just beginning with that thing which we all know about, it takes you step by step by step. It's right the way through, unraveling how a capitalist economy works. And then it builds around that sort of insights, stunning insights as to why we have unemployment, or why there is a struggle over time. Why is it that capitalists are always trying to snatch time away from you? Why do we live a life where our world is kind of orchestrated around a certain kind of concept of temporality, and what the oppressions are which exist with all of that? So I think it's incredibly revelatory in what it does.